So for some of you, my talk might be getting a little into particulars that are a little perplexing, and I'm going to try really hard not to overwhelm you with SRMs, but in my work with meat systems, I came to realize that some of the regulations around what happens with these animals and their materials after they are slaughtered is really, really problematic and a part of, it's just a symptom of a larger crazy system. So this is my talk is on mad cow disease and the fallout for that in our Canadian meat system. The first thing that I think needs to be stated really clearly for anyone who doesn't know, cattle are called bovines. They're part of the bovine family, and they are herbivores. They eat grass. And they have this amazing series of stomachs to capture all the nutrients out of it and then deposit it on the soil and return fertility to the soil. They are herbivores. They do not eat meat. Here's our handy-dandy cow, an important part of our food system. When in 1996, many of you will know, there was an outbreak of mad cow. Well, there was mad cow disease outbreak in England, and in 1996 they recognized that there was a new variation on Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease, and they called it variant they called it a variant of that. And it is one of a family of transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. Like Kathy, I pick the hard things to say. And it's a family of diseases that affects a range of species, including cattle, deer, sheep, elk, moose, and humans, and a few others. And basically it's called spongiform encephalopathy because you get holes in your brains. It looks like a sponge. So when they had this mad cow outbreak in England and they started to see this new variant of this disease in humans, what caused them to recognize that there was maybe a problem was that normally this is a disease, at least in humans, of a much older population, and it was coming out in younger people. And so they started to make the connection between them eating material from diseased animals with this disease. And as soon as that happened, immediately a whole bunch of countries stopped importing anything out of England. The same thing happened. Eventually we had an incidence of mad cow in Canada, and something like 80% of the value of the Canadian beef herd fell in like overnight as a whole ton of countries around the world stopped importing Canadian beef and cattle. So the response to that, in order to keep those export doors open, was to identify, or to go along with what is the international acceptance of what is the vector for this disease. And normally in our brains we do have a protein, prion, and with this transmissible spongiform encephalopathy, it's an abnormal prion. And the general consensus is that in an animal under 30 months, it's just the distal ileum, so that brown part, the lower intestine, the small intestine. For animals over 30 months, they found that abnormal prion was in other portions of the body, and you'll see up there, they're the colorful parts. So it's most of the head, the spinal cord, as well as the distal ileum as well. In an animal under 30 months, the lingo in the industry is UTM. That amounts to about 5 kilograms. In an animal over 30 months, because it's including all of that spine as well as the head, it's about 45 kilograms an animal. That material in the animal is called specified risk material, and that is what the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has been given the authority to oversee across Canada. So what it has meant is that anybody who raises cattle is hugely impacted. Anyone who handles them is hugely impacted. And as you'll see, they put out a range of these pamphlets to tell everybody what suddenly they had to do under what they called the enhanced feed ban, which was brought in 2007, I believe, July. Before that, they did take bovine material out of the bovine feed chain back in a few years before that, but in 2007 they took it out of all animal feed. It was a requirement to keep it out of all animal feed because they didn't trust that sometimes feed distance for chickens might end up in the cattle feed supply, etc. So what it has meant is that anybody who handles a live or a dead cattle has to know what's going to happen to that specified risk material. So for ranchers, if an animal dies on your ranch or for a dairy or whatever, and you keep that animal on that site, then you can go ahead and manage it on your site as you have before, as you would have normally done that, which is generally done through composting or burial. If it leaves your site, if that carcass leaves the site, the whole animal is then regarded as specified risk material, unless you take the time or pay someone to remove all that material from the animal, and then it has to be segregated, it has to be only transported under permit, etc. Am I already at 2 minutes? Holy smokes. So the costs have been crazy, 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 and it has impacted at abattoir levels. It's enormous. It's gone from being an income stream for the abattoirs to a huge, huge cost. This renderers can no longer accept bovine material for the most part unless they absolutely segregate it because of the risk of it being contaminated by specified risk material. If it's composted, it's still regarded as specified risk material. A lot of it just gets landfilled. In BC, our landfills need to be permitted. Well, all across Canada, they need to be permitted to accept this specified risk material. It's a huge cost. Everything has to be segregated, and most landfills won't accept it. So in BC, most of the specified risk material from the cattle is shipped to Alberta. It's rendered, and then it gets mixed with contaminated soil from the oil industry and put in the Coronation landfill. Yeah, I thought you'd like that. So this is a really important point. This year, from January through July, we slaughtered 1.7 million cattle in this family. In the worst case scenario, based on US stats, and I don't think they're willing to be generous with us around this, of those 1.7 million cattle, there might have been 14 that had mad cow disease. But note that we've only had 18 so far to date in Canada. So this is the worst case scenario. So those 14 theoretical mad cows cost $62 million in conservative estimates to manage all of the specified risk material from healthy animals. We treat all cattle as if they all have mad cow disease. The farmers, as we know, can't absorb the costs of this extra bureaucracy and management system. And may I remind you again, cattle are herbivores. We shouldn't have actually had to worry about removing bovine material from their feed supply. And then the other piece of this, ultimately I see this regulation as being about protecting the opportunity to export cattle. There is that connection with human health, as they discovered in England. But the idea of eradicating transmissible spongiform encephalopathy, it naturally occurs across a range of species. We cannot eradicate it, though that is the goal of the CFIA. And it ties into a current phenomenon of us all believing that we can live with zero risk. Life is a risk. Breathing is a risk. Walking down the street is a risk. Putting organisms into our body is a risk. And so to do this kind of overkill on mad cow when the incidence level is so low is just silly. We have a lot better options, and I think that if we could get away from the export market and actually recognize and support provincially licensed plants, we would be way better off. Most of those plants don't survive because they can't get into the marketplaces where most people buy their meat. All the large grocery chains will only deal with federal plants because they don't want to have to consider provincial boundaries. I think what we need to do is get a CanCon kind of approach to those federal chains where they have to have, say, 30% provincially licensed meat. There's also been a test developed that you could test the material and determine if the animal actually had mad cow. We could put some more effort into determining if that is actually as efficacious as it needs to be, and then allow those many, 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 many volumes of, very large volumes of so-called specified risk material to actually be composted and returned to the soil to help with our fertility cycles. And ultimately, we need to recognize and value all portions of these animals that are feeding us. Thank you.